Babylonia said, we call that playing the hits. This is the conversation that I was literally sat down, was sort of doing a dry run this morning. I didn't record anything. I was just talking about it. So I was looking at, as an example, you will invariably get people who will say things like, as an example, with World of Warcraft is a good example. Lord of the Rings Online, Star Wars: The Republic, any game that's been out for a few years, you're going to have people who talk about how the game was the best at this one point in time. This was the best expansion. This was when my class was my favorite class. Everything since this time I haven't liked. Everybody's got a moment in time with any game where they look at it and they say, we only want that one thing. That's the thing that made us the most happy. We want everything else to look like that, feel like that, smell like that, play like that, etc. And I looked at that and I went, you know what? Game development is a lot like being in a band. Because at some point, if you exist long enough to make lots of games, let's look at BioWare with Dragon Age. This is a perfect example with Dragon Age. So Dragon Age, the Vanguard is coming out. And invariably you've got people who are like, Dragon Age Origins was the best one, and anything since Origins is absolute shit. And then you've got people who are like, no, but Dragon Age 2 was really good. And then other people who are like, yeah, but Dragon Age 3. And then you have people like me who like the entirety of the franchise. So this is when you get to a band like the Rolling Stones, as an example. They've been out for a very long time. When they tour, same thing with Bruce Springsteen. When they tour, they're not playing new material. They're playing the old hits. Because they gave up at some point and they said, you know what, we've been as creative as we're ever going to be. Let's just run it out, because the fans, every time we try to play something new on stage, the fans bitch, the fans moan, the fans cry. Why aren't you playing this song? Why aren't you playing this album? We don't want to hear the new shit. We only want to hear the old shit. And so some bands choose to just play the hits because that's what people pay to come see. And so you stop being creative because you don't necessarily need to be. You've got an amazing back catalog. There's nothing wrong with milking that success. And you'll see some companies do that. I would look at, say, Bungie is a good example of that. Bungie has only ever done Halo. Halo is Bungie's jam, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Other companies, like BioWare, they take risks, and they make different franchises, and they make different games, and they evolve the games along the way. But when you do that, you're running the risk of putting out new albums. And like a band, sometimes your fans aren't going to react to that very well. They're going to bitch that you aren't why aren't you playing your greatest hits on stage? Fuck this new game. I don't want to play that game. I want to play Mass Effect 1 was the best game ever. No other Mass Effect game is, or Mass Effect 2 is usually the one. Mass Effect 2 was the best Mass Effect ever, and no Mass Effect game will ever be able to live up to the standards of Mass Effect 2. And so you have fans who refuse to love a franchise because they're stuck on the greatest hits album. That's fine. But I was looking at, like, love him or hate him, a guy like Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. He's not reputably the greatest guy to work with, but he is an undoubtable creative genius who, through the course of his career, has consistently produced new albums. He should have stopped singing 20 years ago. Doesn't matter. He's still, in his late 70s, whatever, and still producing new records year after year. And he could rest on his laurels and produce and go on tour and only play the hits. And they do largely play the hits when they go on tour. But he also plays a lot of new material. And the objective is to sell the new discs that, the new albums that he's putting out over time. But the risk you run is Jethro Tull hasn't been as big as they were in the 70s since the 80s because they didn't ever just play the hits. They were constantly producing new albums and touring those new albums year after year after year. When you do that, you run the risk of pissing off fans who are like, they only want to hear the hits. And that was my thought process this morning, and why Bubblonia's comment just triggered me about playing the hits, because I was literally sitting here this morning thinking about how it's like being in a band and how fans are going to focus on what they want more than anything else. And you get these disgruntled fans when you don't play the hits that they want. And this is also the same thing where it's like, if you're a company trying to build games, that's going to be it's almost an impossible wall to climb, an impossible task, because you're never going to be able to satisfy that portion of your audience base. Ever, never, 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 ever. You will never satisfy them because for whatever reason they've got it stuck in their heads that that song or that album was the best ever, and you've never been able to make anything up to that. That game was the best, and you'll never be able to get back to that. Whereas I like a whole band's catalog. I'll admit that there are some albums that are better than other albums. There are some games that are better than other games. But at the end of the day, I love the whole catalog. Like, I'm not just here one and done. I'm ride or die with all of the stuff that comes out. I'm an equal opportunity gamer when it comes to that respect. But I also think, like, Jethro Tull is a good example of, like, because they've done the folk rock thing in the very early days, and then they went prog rock, and then they went kind of hard rock in the 80s, and then back to prog rock, sort of an evolution. And you have different bands who, like, they'll do like a really hard rock album here, and then they'll do a pop album over here, and then they might do a dance album. Beastie Boys did this as well. Like, they did lots of different stuff as the Beastie Boys. I was actually running around the house this morning. I cannot remember all the lyrics to Paul Revere, and it was driving me nuts this morning because bits and pieces of it were going through my head. And I was like, man, at one point in time I could quote that entire song and sing it a cappella, and now I can't because I just don't remember. And it's because now there's so many other things that cloud my time. Like, I've got video games, I've got TV shows, I've got blogs and podcasts. And back in the day, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have smartphones. It was like we listened to music and read books. Bob Dylan's career is another great example because when he transitioned from folk to electric in the, was it 60s? Dude, people were fucking pissed. You betrayed your roots. You betrayed folk music. You're an asshole. You're not creative. You're a sellout. Ah! That's a great example, Benjamin. Great example. That's a really good example of a guy who has evolved over time. Envy says, let me guess, Ren, you get people who say or tell you, but Ren, so you don't hate any game or think any game sucks? Yeah, I don't know if you were here for that conversation the other day. We had somebody, we actually spawned a YouTube video out of that comment from that person who was adamant that these games sucked because they were like, these games suck for these reasons. And I think they asked, I don't remember the name, I don't remember the exact title of that video, but it was something along the lines of, how do you define a bad game, I think was what the question really. I did a video on it a few days ago, but that spawned out of that conversation because there are people out there who are like, and then if you read the comments of that video, there are still people who are adamant that I am not allowed. They literally are telling me that I am not allowed to say a game is good if they hate it or if the masses say it sucks. And every little troll out there wants to be like, Steam charts. But the Steam charts, man. Look at the Steam reviews. Look at the Steam numbers. Come on, guys. Are you that naive? Like, game dev stats are not Steam stats. And Steam can be an indicator of something, but it can also be abused because of review bombing. And so you have to look at that with a grain of salt, especially if a game is out on multiple platforms, because Xbox and PlayStation don't show their numbers in the same way, and the Steam charts don't show a lot of other data, as an example with live service games, they'll show concurrent users on a given day, estimated, but what they don't show is how many people are retaining subscriptions over a long-term period of time. A good example is if I have a running subscription to Lord of the Rings Online, like I do right now, we have for the past few months, I play Lord of the Rings Online one time a week, but I pay a monthly subscription. And some games like EverQuest in the past, I used to have a Station Pass account that I just ran. Even if I only played like 4 times a year, I would just give money to Daybreak because I like the EverQuest franchise. I am one of those people who, and if you look at the daily concurrence, the daily concurrence do not factor in people like me who continually pay for a game if we like the game and want to support its long-term legacy as a live service product. Um, so yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's that toxic positivity that I've been accused of. You don't hate any games, therefore you're not actually a gamer because you don't hate anything.